Good afternoon, folks. We'll be starting in a few minutes. Just hold on and waiting for a few more people to join us virtually. Yeah, any of you could use your reactions signal or Q&A and tell us if you can hear us all right? All right, thank you all. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Greetings and welcome to the webinar. My name is Tom Malou, and I'm the Air Quality Planning Manager here at DEQ in the Air and Renewable Energy Division. I'd like to welcome you all to the statewide virtual outreach and listening session. The purpose of this webinar is to describe the process and schedule that DEQ will use to develop a long-term statewide comprehensive climate action plan, or CCAP, and to get your input and feedback on what should be included in the plan to develop potential pathways to reduce climate pollution. This plan is being developed under a planning grant that was awarded to DEQ by the US EPA under the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program, or CPRG. Since the award of this grant, DEQ CPRG team has been busy developing various deliverables of the grant. Our accomplishments to date include the development of a short-term Priority Climate Action Plan, or PCAP, and applying for and securing 2 mitigation project implementation grants from EPA that would bring about $200 million to the Commonwealth. As we move into the CCAP development phase, DEQ is seeking input from a wide range of interested parties, including the public, major stakeholders, state agencies, and other groups on both the process and content of the plan. To this end, DEQ is holding a series of regional community events throughout Virginia. The webinar today is for a statewide audience that may not be able to attend these regional meetings. Thank you again for being here, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts on both the process and plan to identify possible ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Now I will pass the discussion over to Allison France to provide more details on the CCAP planning process.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for being with us today. And these co-chairs throughout the presentation today, so just kind as we navigate that. Let's get started here. First, I'm going to go over today's agenda. So we're going to start with a short little video and then go over some of our meeting goals of what we hope to cover today. We're going to provide you a brief overview of the first phase of the DEQ climate planning process, which was the Priority Climate Action Plan, and then move over to the bulk of our content for today and why we're here to talk about climate planning, which is the Comprehensive Climate Action Plan. So we'll provide an overview of that before moving into a community discussion and hear some of your input about what matters most to you in this activity, and then we'll give you some wrap up and concluding materials before moving on. All right. Let's see. Just going to navigate our. Can you guys hear me okay now? If you put in the chat how to go here. Okay. If you just give me one moment, I'm going to pause and sharing here for 1 second while I'm okay, sorry about that.
All right, does this sound better for you? I'll try and speak a little louder too. Okay, that sounds good. Okay, great. Let me get back into our presentation. Thank you guys for helping us out with that. All right, perfect. Now we can move on. So for all of us online today, this is some key functions that you're going to be using throughout the presentation or that we'll be using with you. So the Q&A, as many of you have been able to figure out already, that's where you're going to be able to put any of your comments and questions that we'll be monitoring throughout the presentation. So feel free to use that at any time. We also have a chat function, but this is one-way communication from us to you. So this is where some of our team members will be putting in links for you to reference throughout our presentation today. So feel free to reference that at any time. And then if you are having trouble hearing us, it might be on my end, but also you might want to navigate your audio trouble as well with your speakers. So you can always click that drop down next to unmute and navigate your speakers just like I just did and see if that works better for you. But please let us know at any time if you have any problems hearing us or have any questions. We also, I will mention, want this to be a pretty free-flowing discussion. As I mentioned, we'll be monitoring chats. So if you have questions throughout the presentation as they come up, we'll do our best to answer those. But we also have designated question periods as well. And with that being said, we'll get you started with a short video.
Virginia has a clear invested interest in cleaner air for all, reliable and affordable clean energy, and improved resilience from increased storms, floods, and a changing climate. The Virginia Department of Environmental Quality is taking steps to meet these challenges through a climate pollution reduction grant from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. This grant consists of two parts: climate action plan and implementation projects. In March 2024, DEQ released the Virginia Priority Climate Action Plan. This plan identifies innovative and high-impact projects to reduce greenhouse gas emissions over 5 years. DEQ based the plan on the 2020 greenhouse gas inventory and input from Virginia communities, stakeholders, and the public. Now, as part of the second part in this process, DEQ will build off the shorter-term plan by developing a comprehensive climate action plan. This is a longer-term statewide plan that will identify and evaluate potential actions to further reduce greenhouse gas emissions over 25 years. This plan will also look at existing goals and requirements for reducing climate pollution. In July 2024, the EPA awarded Virginia almost $200 million worth of funding for projects to reduce methane emissions and enhance Virginia's natural habitats. Now you may ask, how does this impact me? Cleaner air is good for everyone. Reducing extreme climate impacts such as floods and storms also helps us have a better overall quality of life. Now, DEQ wants to hear from you. DEQ wants to understand how your community goals might align with efforts to reduce climate pollution by 2050. There are many sectors to consider when addressing climate pollution. Let's look at each one. Transportation, industry, electric power, buildings, waste and wastewater, agriculture, and forestry and natural lands. So, what are the climate pollution challenges in your community? And how can that information be used to develop solutions to help your community and communities across Virginia? You can share your thoughts on reducing climate pollution in Virginia through the updated DEQ Community Survey. Scan the QR code or visit this link to provide your input today. For more information on the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant and to view any upcoming events, visit deq.virginia.gov/CPRG or email our team at cprg@deq.virginia.gov. Let's work together to protect and improve air quality for the well-being of all Virginians.
All right, hopefully that gave you a bit of an introduction about why we're here today and what we're going to be talking about. Before we move on into the meat of our presentation and that content, I'm going to stop sharing. We have a quick poll. I just am curious to see how many of you have perhaps engaged with the CPRG planning process before. So I'm going to share my screen really quickly. Are here. And if you're able to and want to participate, you can either scan the QR code or go to that URL, slido.com, and type in the number, and then add in if you've heard of DEQ's climate planning process before or have engaged with us. So this might be your first time learning about CPRG, or maybe you've heard about us before but have never attended a meeting, or maybe you've been super involved and an enthusiastic attendant and have attended many of our meetings, webinars, or other communications. So if this works for you and you want to participate, we can see where everybody's at. Oh, awesome. We see a lot of first-time engagements here today, so thank you so much for joining. Give this maybe a second or two more. And we also see some enthusiastic returners to our engagement, so that's great too. Okay, wonderful. Well, this just gives us a good idea of where everybody's at and how much information we need to spend on everything. But thank you all so much, whether this is your first time around or your second, third, or fourth engagement with us. We appreciate that. All right, we'll let this keep flowing in, but we'll go back to the presentation now. Awesome. In terms of our meeting goals and why we're really here today and what we hope to get out of this conversation is that DEQ wants to gain local feedback on potential climate actions to be included in the development of Virginia's Comprehensive Climate Action Plan. So we're working on this plan right now. It'll be due to the Environmental Protection Agency in December of this year. And right now we're going through a public input and stakeholder engagement process to help identify the various community goals, challenges, and potential opportunities and climate actions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So this will all be considered alongside other streams of input that we're getting when developing the long-term plan. So we've had some in-person community meetings, we've done some stakeholder engagements, and also these virtual engagements. So many different streams of input that we'll talk about a little bit later as well, but all of this will help us to identify a lot of that content about community needs, benefits, goals, and challenges. So we'll get into that. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Ava Levain, which is our greenhouse gas inventory specialist. Oh, actually, before we get into that, I forgot I have one more slide. I'm sorry, but I will mention as well the potential benefits of climate action in your community. So when we talk about climate action and what really matters to community members and why we are engaging in this plan in the first place and what impact it has on you, we talk about a couple of different things, such as protecting and restoring natural resources, maybe expanding green spaces or parks in your community. We often talk about improved public health and local air quality, reducing air pollutants, and also there are financial benefits as well, such as increasing the energy efficiency of your home and lowering your bills, or expanding workforce development opportunities and expanding that clean energy workforce. We also often talk about benefits in transportation, such as increasing mobility and public transportation options. And then the biggest thing that I think people think about when we talk about climate change is reducing those risks from extreme weather, like extreme heat or extreme flooding. And now I'll pass it over to Ava.
Thank you for the introduction, Allison. Hello, everyone, and thank you again for attending our statewide CPRG Comprehensive Climate Action Plan webinar. My name is Ava Levain, and I've been on DEQ's CPRG team for a year and a half as DEQ's Greenhouse Gas Inventory Specialist. I'm excited to share with you an overview of DEQ's Priority Climate Action Plan, or PCAP, to set the stage for Julia, my colleague's discussion on the Comprehensive Climate Action Plan, or CCAP. I will also be presenting a draft of DEQ's greenhouse gas inventory that's the basis for the CCAP. During the PCAP, we engaged Virginia residents through various platforms, both online and in person. We developed a PCAP survey similar to our current CCAP survey, and we received 322 responses from 171 unique zip codes throughout the Commonwealth. From the valuable feedback we received, several climate action priorities emerged. Virginians expressed strong desire for increased use of renewable energy sources in their communities, more green spaces to enhance local environments, and improved public transit options for easier mobility. The respondents highlighted the most important benefits from these climate actions being better air quality, improved transportation, and enhanced community resilience. Participants noted the significant barriers that prevent them from taking personal actions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, being the high costs of energy efficient alternatives and limited access to transit alternatives. And finally, respondents felt that the greatest opportunities for overcoming barriers lie in government incentives and policy and community unity. In the PCAP, we developed 10 priority measures aimed at reducing greenhouse gas emissions. I'll give just an example of these measures by sector. For the transportation sector, vehicle electrification and use of low carbon fuels. For the building sector, energy efficiency improvements in homes, businesses, and institutions. For industry, use of low carbon materials in industrial processes. For the electric power sector, use of low emitting and reliable power sources. For natural and working lands, protection and restoration of forests, agricultural land, wetlands, and other high carbon landscapes. And lastly, for the waste and wastewater sector, the capture of methane emissions from landfills or water treatment facilities. Now I will be discussing Virginia's comprehensive greenhouse gas inventory by sector. Inventories are crucial for any air quality plan because they provide a baseline understanding of our current and past emissions. Virginia's greenhouse gas inventories are developed using EPA's state inventory tool and encompasses all sectors and greenhouse gases, including carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and fluorinated gases. For the development of the inventory, 2021 was the most recent year in EPA's state inventory tool, and emissions in this graph in this chart are all in terms of million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. In 2021, Virginia emitted approximately 146 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Some key takeaways are transportation is by far the largest emitting sector in Virginia, accounting for over a third of all greenhouse gas emissions, with personal vehicles accounting for over half of the transportation emissions. Electric power is the second most emitting sector in Virginia, which includes emissions from electricity generation at power plants. And industry is the third most emitting sector, which reflects Virginia's industry-heavy landscape. Another very important sector to note is the natural lands, the forestry and land use sector. In Virginia, forests, grasslands, wetlands, urban trees, and other natural lands have the carbon sequestration abilities to capture over a third of what's equivalent to over a third of Virginia's emissions. This emphasizes the need for Virginia to preserve our natural resources while also addressing the major anthropogenic or human-caused emissions. And this is a draft historical and projection chart of Virginia's greenhouse gas emission trends from 2005 through 2050. Since 2005, from 2005 to 2021, net greenhouse gas emissions, which includes both greenhouse gas emissions and sinks, have decreased 26%. The largest cause of this decrease is from fuel shifting in the electric power sectors, but there are also moderate decreases in emissions from all the other emitting sectors. These projections are just preliminary estimates of Virginia's future greenhouse gas emissions under a business as usual scenario if factors such as population, economic factors, policies, emission trends were to continue as they are now. As part of the CCAP deliverable, DEQ and our contractors are modeling Virginia-specific emission projections by policies and by sector to predict future emissions under various scenarios. That concludes my portion of the presentation, but I will take any questions or comments that you may have in the Q&A box.
We do have a question. So the first question is, are the impacts known from pending federal grant suspensions? And is there any risk that the climate planning effort will be at risk in response to those?
I will defer this question to Tom Ballou, our air quality planning manager.
The quick answer to that question is at the moment, we don't foresee any interruption or any um, delay or halting of our efforts in this climate planning process. We are again in contact with our EPA friends who are coordinating the grant with us, and we have been able to continue to access funds when we are seeking expenditures to cover expenditures as part of the grant. So at the moment, we do not foresee any significant impacts and are moving forward with business as usual, which you've heard that term already.
So we do have another question. That question is, will data centers be included in the inventory? And if they are, will they be segmented into commercial and electricity inventories?
Data centers are included in both the current and future inventories. That is one of the things that we are trying to work on to develop a more Virginia-specific future inventory based on the current electricity demand projections that we're seeing from both from Dominion and from other published sources that will have an impact on that Virginia-specific BAU. And will also have to be addressed when we look at potential ways to reduce those emissions along with emissions from other sectors. We are doing our best to try to identify the specific contribution of data centers in terms of that increased electricity load. And that's what we're working with our consultant at the moment to come up with the best projections that we can to address that sector, because it is a very significant and growing sector of both electricity demand and importance to the Commonwealth in terms of the economy and so on. Most of the way we do inventories, we usually categorize everything by particular sectors. So in this case, the way our inventory works right now, most of the impact of that demand increase is being shown in the electric power sector, which is that orange slice of the pie, if you will. So that will be captured in that. There will also be some spillover into the commercial energy sector, which is where we would capture any imported electricity that's being used to support data center operations.
Okay, and that concludes my portion. So I will hand it off to Julia to share more about our comprehensive climate action plan work. Thank you.
Hello, thank you everybody for attending today. My name is Julia Wack. I am the Administrative Data Coordinator for the CPRG Planning Group. So thank you, Ava, for a comprehensive overview of our emissions inventory, which is a really critical starting point for us, looking forward to building the Comprehensive Climate Action Plan. So what is the Comprehensive Climate Action Plan, or CCAP? The CCAP builds off of the Priority Climate Action Plan from extending a 5-year roadmap to reducing emissions into a 25-year roadmap. So this expansive plan is going to include more elements than what was included in the priority plan, such as using this emissions inventory to build out future projections, as Tom was mentioning, starting to look at crafting a Virginia-specific business as usual type of scenario so that we can better understand those future projections and what they mean for Virginia. Also using those projections to set reduction targets. So specifically looking at what measures can be leveraged in this plan to reduce climate pollution in the state. So once we identify those potential strategies, DEQ is also going to be identifying potential funding opportunities that could be leveraged in order to support these measures really taking action throughout over the course of now to 2050. There will also be some comprehensive analyses, such as an analysis of air quality and looking at what other co-pollutants are going to be impacted by some of these pollution reduction measures, and also looking at how this is going to impact workforce. So looking at clean energy jobs and where are there potential gaps and challenges, and what potential partnerships could be created to better equip Virginians with moving towards cleaner energy. Also looking at community-wide impacts. So what are the potential barriers that communities are facing from implementing these in their own communities or personal lives, and within a larger scale of looking at Virginia, how can we better understand those community needs to better address them in the plan and set ourselves up for success here. So who is providing input on the plan? This is a really critical question. We have different modes of engagement, and all of these different types of engagement are going into DEQ creating a representative plan for all of Virginia. So we have the general public as a stream of input, and we have multiple ways that we're conducting this engagement. So here right now, we're conducting our statewide virtual session. We also are conducting in-person community listening sessions, as well as always accepting written comment via our email. We also have a survey. So just finding multiple modes of engagement with the public to ensure that they have access to be able to communicate with us regarding what they would like to see in this plan. We're also conducting a formal stakeholder group. So basically that incorporates key organizations that represent the various economic sectors across Virginia. We do also have a published list of every organization and respective representative for that organization on our webpage under the CCAP stakeholder group section, in case you're ever curious. But for example, bringing together the agricultural sector, different environmental groups, different utilities, and other key organizations that are really going to be involved in making this plan a success in the future. We are also conducting an interagency working group. So bringing together different state agencies so that they're aware of this planning effort and they're able to interact with us. So we're able to figure out what some of those barriers might be, in a sense of what would we need to actually implement some of these measures? Is there a certain type of authority that would be needed by DEQ or another state organization that we might be working with? Really to figure out who wants to be involved in making this plan just more representative, but also just how we can, make some of these action items more feasible. We're also going to be conducting outreach with localities, regional groups, and tribes. So there are various regional groups that have also received planning grants in the state of Virginia. For example, those are going to be Plan RBA for the Richmond area, Hampton Roads Planning District Commission on the Eastern Shore. Then we also have Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, who's received a planning grant. So we want to make sure that we're not overlapping our engagement efforts with those efforts that are ongoing, and better understand how we can work with those partners to leverage their boots on the ground work with communities and make sure that's reflected in the plan. We're also going to be conducting tribal engagement. The Monacan Indian Nation did receive a planning grant, but in addition, there are other state and federally recognized tribes that DEQ will be engaging with to make sure that they have the opportunity to give their input on this climate plan. And in particular, EPA has a focus on low income and disadvantaged communities. So looking at different environmentally burdened areas in the state, doing some spatial analyses to really figure out where those are and how we can make sure that these communities have the opportunity to engage with us as frequently as they would like, and that we're able to implement their suggestions in this plan as well. So just to give you a little bit of a timeline, I know that was a mouthful. So wanted to give a little bit more structure here and just share with you guys how exactly we're balancing all of these multiple modes of engagement. So in October of 2024, we did kick off our planning process by having a couple webinars and just looping people in on what's going to be happening over the course of this year. The final plan will be due to EPA in December of 2025. So we really started in October wanting to just hit the ground running with some of this engagement. So throughout November and December, we conducted our stakeholder group. And that is ongoing into March. We're going to have our last stakeholder group meeting. But right now we're conducting these community listening sessions as well as the stakeholder group engagement, and also coordinating with those regional groups that I mentioned had received planning grants. In addition, we're just about to kick off our interagency engagement. So that's in reference to the multiple state organizations that I was mentioning in the past. And we are also looking forward to kicking off our LIDAC and tribal engagement throughout the rest of the spring. So in the summertime, we are going to look at all of the feedback that we have gotten from all of these different stakeholders and figure out a way that we can draft a representative plan in the summertime. We're going to release that draft plan in the fall so that everybody has the opportunity to stay looped in on what exactly we've come up with and give their feedback so that we can then take that in and create a final plan that will be submitted in December of 2025. As I said, I know it was a lot, so if anyone has any questions related to that timeline or who's engaging, how they're engaging, please feel free to drop that in the Q&A, or just any questions about the Comprehensive Climate Action Plan more generally. So we do have one question. I see a question just came in the chat. People who cannot make a listening session, how should they provide feedback? So we do also have a public participation guide. I'm going to ask one of my coworkers to help me out here and drop that link for you all in the chat. But DEQ has many methods of engagement, whether that's in person or virtual. We are conducting these webinars, and we also are conducting these in-person sessions that are actually hybrid. So there is a listening option if you're not able to physically attend. All of these are basically going to result in meeting minutes being posted, presentations being posted on our website. So you'll always be able to stay up to date with what we're doing on our webpage. But we also do have a calendar of events where we just list all of our in-person and virtual events there easily for you to be able to reference. But in addition to those methods, we also have a survey. Right now we're sitting at about 250 responses. That's going to stay open through April, and give people the opportunity to give us some quantifiable data that we can hold on to, looking at where exactly we're getting input across the state and who exactly we're getting it from and what that input looks like, how we can begin to start to structure that. We also have an email, so you can always reach out to us with written comment at any time. And within that public participation guide, it's just going to list for you all the different ways that you can stay engaged with DEQ throughout the planning process. I do also see one more question related to the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission. And I believe the answer would be the mainland HRPDC, not the Accomack Northampton. So just wanted to clarify that. Also wanted to mention, part of our LIDAC outreach is really just figuring out where exactly, what areas we're able to hit, you know, basically where DEQ regional offices are. That's where we've been hosting most of our meetings. But beyond that, where are we missing engagement? Where are we not hearing from people? And we're looking at conducting some engagement on the Eastern Shore in addition, being that we don't have any offices there. We just want to make sure that we're getting the word out across the entire state. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move forward and pass this back off to Alice.
Thank you, Julia, for that overview. Back again, we're going to have another poll for you. So this is where we're going to move into more of the feedback session of our presentation today. So really hearing from you and what you want to speak to us about today. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second and then go back to that poll. We have another, it's our last one. I promise I won't bother you guys too much with these polls, but we'll move over here. All right, so this question for you today is which sectors, for example, agriculture or transportation, are most important to you when we talk about reducing greenhouse gas emissions? So personally, maybe you have relevant work experience in the transportation industry or commercial buildings, and that's something that really matters most to you. Or maybe you're really passionate about agriculture and farmlands. So you can reference the handout link that we sent. That has a description of all of the sectors and examples of greenhouse gas emissions and reduction activities if you want a more helpful description. But you're able to rank these as well on this poll. So if you want to move around, explore your options a little bit and prioritize which ones are most important to you, you can fiddle with that a little bit, but we'll allow this to go for just a second, just to see where everybody's at and what their interests really are and what we should maybe prioritize in our discussion today as well. All right, looks like we have transportation is definitely a big one. That makes sense, given that that's our largest emitting sector within our inventory. That's usually one that we see a lot within our conversation. Electric power also making a lot of sense. We see that discussion come up quite a bit. And then looks like we have residential and commercial buildings down at the bottom, followed by agriculture, industry, waste and wastewater, which is interesting, forestry and natural lands, and then electric power and transportation. Okay, great. We'll leave this poll open. If people want to continue putting in their responses, we'll look at this later on as well or after the presentation. So if you are still figuring out how to log in, you have time to do so. All right, we'll go back to the presentation though. Thank you so much for all of you that are engaging with us. We are at DEQ exploring new ways to try and make these presentations engaging for you all. So we are experimenting with a lot of different technology and appreciate you guys being willing participants in that. But now we'll move on to our next discussion question. So discussion question number 2 is what specific actions are you already taking to reduce greenhouse gas emissions or are already happening in your community? So you can put your thoughts in the Q&A portion and we'll respond to those, maybe read some of those out loud, comment on those, or if you have any questions as well about this, we'll be answering those as well. But we'll give you guys a few minutes to input your responses and take your time if you need to think about things. But for example, if you need some ideas to maybe get your brain going a little bit, for me personally, I walk to work. So that's one way that I am very fortunate to live in a community where it's walkable and I'm able to reduce my emissions that way. But you know, walkability and public transportation is not always an option. So maybe that doesn't resonate with you. But another way we talk about waste a lot. Something I like to do is I like to try and purchase secondhand as much as I can, whether that be clothing or materials or even furniture. That's something that you can often do to reduce emissions in that way. And something else, maybe composting is something that you're really passionate about. We have a little photo there about composting or recycling. Maybe that's something that you regularly engage with to reduce your waste.
And we do have a couple of responses online of how our attendees are taking personal actions to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, including investing in solar in LMI areas, which I might ask you to elaborate on what LMI stands for.
Low and moderate income
Okay.
areas. Yep.
Solar on their house, driving electric vehicles, reducing air travel substantially, composting food waste. One of our attendees drives a hybrid and would use public transport if it was available to her. In Chesapeake, it is not available in her suburban area. She also buys most of her clothing secondhand and recycles.
Awesome. Thank you for the clarification on that one too. Yeah. Yeah, feel free to keep putting these in as well. I will mention as well, all of the discussion questions that we're asking of you today, these are also found on our survey. So if you want to take more time to respond to these and share more detailed input, you are able to do so on that survey. We also see buying used clothing. That's one that I often do a lot of. I think it's become a lot more accessible and it's in general very fun. So
Oh, we have a question on how to input it. Oh, a response to question number 2.
So we're just using the Q&A function to basically take written record of every comment that's submitted. So as long as you're dropping it in the Q&A, I will be keeping a separate record of everything that is input. So don't worry, I won't miss your answer.
And we have another response saying they recycle, including plastics that are not locally recyclable, instead of recycling them through TerraCycle.
And then I guess I will also clarify that for these questions, I think we've mentioned a little bit, but this input is helping us better understand for residents of Virginia what is accessible, what's feasible, what's already being done, to better understand those opportunities, how to better invest in those opportunities and accessibilities, and then understand where the barriers and the challenges are. So what community members are not able to do. So that'll actually be our next question as well. I think we can move on here. Thank you so much for providing input on those. It's always so fun. And actually, we have one more. Let's see. I'll comment on this one. We have buying secondhand, composting, driving less, buying infrequently, growing our own food is amazing, reducing plastic consumption or reusing plastic, and advocating for policies to support renewable energy consumption and facilitating the climate risk to raise awareness. And composting is often one as well. And then we have here in Northern Virginia, communities with close proximity to job centers, transit, and services are expanding housing options and allowing more housing to be built in these accessible areas, rather than it going out to areas where people have to drive long distances. Yes, that commuting impact is very prevalent, and we've heard that a lot in our discussions as well. Composting, again, that's a big one. That's amazing that that is becoming more accessible to community members as well. Only flying for a great need, buying reuse, and then washing and reusing even something as simple as aluminum foil. And let's see, we have one here. We are trying to develop a sustainability plan covering a homeowner association representing over 2,000 homes in Northern Virginia, and then providing best practices for homeowners. We have rooftop solar, residential energy storage, planting native trees, natives and trees to screen homes. That's always critical. Wonderful. Thank you all so much for these. This is great. This is really helping to further our discussion and our insights about what all is already being done. All right. And now sort of into more meat of our discussion today. This is often where we get into maybe some of the nitty gritty of this discussion, but what barriers are preventing you or your community from reducing greenhouse gas emissions? So as much as we talk about what we're already doing and what consumers or residents can do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, there are often always barriers, which is what we're hoping to address in this plan. So if you want to talk a little bit and share your comments on what those barriers might be for you, perhaps it's time inefficiencies of maybe using public transit, maybe it's cost and accessibility. So not being able to put solar on your roof or drive an electric vehicle, that's not always an option for all residents. And commuting is often one that we hear a lot when we talk about transportation, and even lack of access to recycling infrastructure or composting infrastructure in your community is something that is often a barrier for people to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and come with those concerns as well. So if you want to share some of those insights as well, we'll be happy to read those and comment on those as well. We'll give you guys just a few minutes. Feel free to take your time and reflect on this comment as well. I'll begin to read some of these as they come in. We have Dominion's policies restricting mid to large scale third-party solar, absolutely. And then we have the cost of electric vehicles, also hard to avoid plastic and packaging, which is certainly the case across not only the Commonwealth, but globally as well. We have, again, the cost of electric vehicles and energy efficiency upgrades, even with rebates, and infrastructure that does not easily support walking and biking. We have one, eliminate my lawn, which is actually great. Yes, always encouraging pollinators and native species to grow. Grass is not always the best for our environment. Oh yeah, and we also have electric yard equipment as well, which was mentioned, to transition away from gas-fueled equipment. Cost to convert fleet, maintenance yard equipment, yep, homes as well. Yeah, those energy efficiency upgrades is often for homeowners and even renters alike, especially if you're a renter, that is a big barrier, being unable to often, invest or have those energy efficiency upgrades invested for you. And so you see those cost savings. Yeah, these are all great. Yes, we see a comment as well about our car-centric culture with the Virginia Department of Transportation. Has some good programs, but we are continuing to see widening highways and arterials, making areas more car dependent and limiting more affordable options. So that walkability and commuter accessibility is often in transportation a big discussion. And yes, and encouraging HOAs to support pollinator plants. Sometimes they're seen as messy and not always advocated for or even allowed for homeowners. And then the city of Chesapeake does not offer curbside recycling anymore. And a barrier is limited opportunities for community composting. Not everyone has land, yeah, absolutely, for at-home composting. And restaurants and commercial scale composting would need to support that and need to have support in investing in them. Yeah, this is wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing all of these. This is something that, it resonates with a lot of us, I think, as well. This is something we hear a lot of for all of these topics, whether it's waste, transportation, homes, energy efficiency. These are all real barriers that we are facing across the Commonwealth, across the United States, and things that we hope that through this comprehensive climate action plan, we are able to develop, address, and then develop roadmaps to increasing their accessibility and improving programs for. And then we also have one, air and water pollution. Yes, caused by industry infrastructure. It's not something that a community can control. Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about these questions as well, I will mention that a lot of these are, maybe more individual or personal, but we look at these at very different scales. So we see the actions that community members can take or may not be able to take, but then that also is coupled with the large, I think, barrier that we talk about, which is the action that needs to be taken by people in decisions of power and decision-making entities, and the actual state or federal programs that would need to be put into place to overcome a lot of these challenges. So that is a very real barrier to a lot of these as well. So balancing those and developing sort of that roadmap is very insightful for us. And yes, we see the expansion of urban planning as well, removing natural areas to build houses, talking about specifically in the Chesapeake, but I think we do see that a lot throughout the Commonwealth as well, expanding communities and then balancing that with the need to preserve natural lands. And also protecting watersheds with healthy riparian plants around streams and rivers. Great. This is very helpful discussion for us, so thank you so much. I think you guys can continue to input your thoughts on question number 3, but we'll move on as well to keep the conversation flowing. So this is our 4th discussion question for you. What specific emission reduction measures do you wish were in place in your community or for DEQ to consider in the CCAP? So we talk about these opportunities, we've talked about these barriers. Now, what are these plans or steps, actions, opportunities that you would hope to see within your community or in the state as a whole? So for example, implementing recycling and composting programs to reduce landfill waste, or maybe you want to see a stronger urge by communities to protect and restore green spaces and tree canopies, or implement solar on rooftops, parking garages, and parking lots. Or maybe you want to see a larger funding pool and support for expanded public transportation options for communities across the Commonwealth. We talk a lot about electric vehicle charging infrastructure, expanding that to make it more accessible for people who do transition over to electric vehicles. And then I think we've talked a little bit already about energy efficiency, not only of residential homes, but also commercial buildings, state buildings, local government buildings. If any of these resonate with you, feel free to share these as well. So these emission reduction measures, as we had talked about, as Ava went through with the Priority Climate Action Plan, will continue to be expanded upon and developed, and will sort of encapsulate, I would say, the very big picture of the CCAP are these emission reduction measures, reflecting the priorities and needs of Virginia. Yes, we see community choice aggregation of power for locally generated energy, virtual power plants, resilient shelters for power and outages. So that resiliency theme is also very critical. Legislation or policy to require data centers to limit water use and provide all energy use as renewables as well. Invasive plant removal to strengthen tree canopies and restore tree canopies and preserve existing trees during development. Expansion of the HRT public transit in the Chesapeake to suburban areas and microtransit in rural areas. And then we also have a comment that the files in the chat are not accessible. So we'll work on addressing that for you. Thank you for letting us know. All of the above. Yes, I would agree with you on that one as well. Electric vehicle education, electric school buses. Yes. Expanding Norfolk Light Rail to surrounding communities, building energy efficiency, public transit and EV charging infrastructure, absolutely, data center accountability, and careful land use policies to protect forests. Solar on all public and private schools. We also hear protecting wildlife corridors by connecting and expanding rural fragments and agrivoltaics to integrate solar with farms. Yes, thank you all for sharing. Plastics and electronics manufacturing responsibly. I think all of these comments are very helpful. It also shows the sort of diversification of both what can be taken at the local level and then also what we need at the state and or federal level. Clear and standard recycling rules across communities. And then solar farmland cover for native plantings as well. Tom, did you have any comments on any of these programs as well in relation to any of the work that DEQ is already doing or that we know of partnering agencies already accomplishing or working on?
And I won't try to move. Hopefully you all can hear me. I would just say that a lot of the measures and activities you're talking about here are already being implemented, not universally throughout Virginia, but certainly in localities. Our task here, or our challenge, is to find ways to make these programs larger in scale and more accessible throughout the Commonwealth, which will then produce more emission reductions. So that's going to be one of the goals of the CCAP, is to identify these types of programs and how they might be expanded and to become more effective.
Mm-hmm.
We hear recycling a lot because, and it is very hit or miss now these days because of the lack of places for the recycling to go, and all that has had an impact on people either discontinuing or cutting back in the recycling program. So hopefully that's something that I think both not only Virginia, but I think the country as a whole could do a better job at.
We also are hearing state policies can better support climate-friendly land use and development patterns. These can significantly reduce transportation emissions, lower building emissions, and protect natural area carbon sinks, and change the structure of electric utilities to public benefit corporations like Vermont Green Mountain Power. Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I think with that, you also, as mentioned before, can continue to provide your comments on this discussion question. This is sort of the key question that we are hoping to capture and gain insight on today from you all. So continue to roll those thoughts in as you think of them. And then our final question for you today is, what is missing? So based on our conversation, is there anything else you'd like to know or for DEQ to consider in the CCAP? So maybe there's something that we covered on briefly but did not expand upon and you have a question on. Maybe we didn't cover something and you're curious about it. And if so, we'll be happy to try and answer that for you as best we can. Or maybe there's additional input that you want when we talk about developing the CCAP. So we talk about the different content that's going to enter the plan, the different engagement processes as well. Who else maybe needs to be included, all of those things. We're happy to receive that input as well. Additional stakeholders in the nonprofit resilience sector. Yes, absolutely. And I would say with that as well, any specific, we're always hoping to expand both our outreach and then also our long-term engagement. So while this plan is being developed in December, that does not mean that climate planning or climate in general stops. So we're hoping to continue long-term partnerships throughout this and long-term reporting on this plan as well. So any insight into direct stakeholders, direct community-based organizations or nonprofits that you hope to be better reflected in this plan, or have a stronger seat at the table that we can talk to, or that you want to continue a conversation with, we're always happy to receive that input as well. And then we have a question here: is chemical recycling helpful in your opinion? I am not the subject matter expertise on this, so I might defer perhaps to Tom if he's able to answer appropriately.
I think in general, recycling is a good thing, especially if you can recover, if you're talking about solvents or oils, all of those can be recycled and reused. Again, I think the challenge there is accessibility and the ability to recycle large amounts of chemicals, because that's usually in most cases jurisdictions only have a once or twice a year of recycling those types of materials, which is kind of limiting. So it's all a matter of having the infrastructure to be able to do something with whatever you're trying to recycle.
Thank you. We also have covering coal train cars to limit coal gas pollution. Let's see here. I'll read this question out loud for us. Thank you for that. Will there be a statement that addresses the elephant in the room, how this plan will be used, even if the federal policies or funding are no longer supportive of climate action planning? It feels like it carried more weight or momentum under the Biden administration, but can it be communicated to the public that this plan is still important to Virginia and will be followed regardless of federal politics? Yes, thank you for that question. Also refer that to Tom for the answers to that.
Yeah, I think the main way I respond to this question usually is the fact that we're talking about doing this plan and putting a plan together is significant for the Commonwealth, because it's really the first comprehensive plan to deal with greenhouse gas emission reductions and climate change that Virginia has ever done. There's been energy policy or energy plans and other sorts of plans, but this is the first real climate plan. Will we implement everything that goes into this plan? Probably not. Certainly not initially, not immediately. But it is going to, we hope it's going to serve as a future roadmap for action to be taken when there's support to do it.
Thank you. Yeah, hopefully that clarifies that answer for you a little bit more. Feel free to let us know if you have additional questions on that. And then a clarification for the chemical recycling. It would be more about breaking down plastics using high temperature processes.
I'm just not really familiar enough with that particular process that, I'm assuming that there is a place, there is a niche for that kind of recycling. Certainly it's better than, I just don't, I can't really talk about um, the specific benefits because I'm just not familiar enough with the process.
I am not,
I think you're better off, the plastics side of thing is better, the better answer is to not use as much plastic.
we can
But that's
also.
a different story.
Yeah, I don't think any of us are maybe the experts in recycling, but we do have team members at DEQ who are, so we can always get your information and be sure to follow up on that with our respective recycling experts, so to speak, in our land division. Thank you, Rebecca, for your comments. And then we have what types of performance metrics and targets will the plan set? For example, state and national analyses show that transportation emissions must be reduced with both per capita reductions in vehicle miles traveled in the order of 20 to 30%, in addition to rapid adoption of electric vehicles as well. David, do you want to take a look at this one, or maybe Tom? We have different performance metrics and targets set, or we'll be identifying those, I suppose, throughout each sector. Sort of when we talk about the business as usual model that we're going to be developing, or is actually in development right now, we look at sort of the degrees, whether that be high level, high action taken with ambitious policies, more of a medium wedge, if you so to speak, as well, of what that would take. So medium level priorities and policies, and then low level as well. And then we have the business as usual. So if no action was taken, no policies. And so those will be quantified. And then we also are comparing those to current policies that are, or state and federal policies that are already in place. So we look at the VCEA, the Virginia Clean Economy Act has a net zero goal by 2045. So that will be considered in the analysis as well. And then also the different analyses per sector. So Tom, if you wanted to clarify that a little bit more or explain anything.
I think you mentioned, you have the Virginia Clean Economy Act that does require carbon-free generation from our regulated utilities. So there are metrics out there already that we're going to have to consider when we put this plan together and how we might get to those particular goals. In terms of vehicles specifically that you call out, a couple things there. One, we will certainly have to address the need for additional infrastructure to support widespread transition to electric vehicles and what it would take in terms of that infrastructure to get to certain levels of EV adoption. The other thing I would say is that, no, it just slipped my mind. There are other things that could be potentially mentioned in terms of incentives. There are and may still be federal incentives for electric vehicles. There could also be a recommendation to provide some sort of incentives on the state level as well. So again, you must realize that a lot of these pathways to reducing carbon are going to be recommendations. This is something that could be done, but you're going to need to take actions for that to happen, like legislation or regulations or a combination thereof. There's have to be some mechanism to implement the things that go into the plan.
Yes, thank you for that. Let's see, we have recommendations for reading. We see on plastic, see the books, The Story of Stuff and Year of No Garbage. And then we actually have a question here as well about recycling. So wanting to know more about recycling endpoints. I've heard that sometimes plastics are collected and then end up in the landfill, which is true. Yeah, sometimes when we recycle, because of how confusing it is, recycling requirements vary based on even community, but different states as well have different ways that different plastics are recycled. So we have different numbers of plastics, and some are recycled here and some aren't. And it even comes down to the facility, whether they will take certain plastics. And so sometimes we see contamination in recycling bins. And if there's a certain amount of contamination, then sometimes the plastic will just have to be, that was intended for recycling will have to end up in the landfill because of that. And unfortunately, a lot of the plastic that we think could be recycled is often not, based on how products are manufactured and boxed and packaged. So it's very complicated. Again, I'm not a recycling expert, but that is the case, and it is a problem widespread, not just for Virginia, I would say across the entire United States, where we see challenges in how to better recycle, whether through single stream or multi-stream recycling. All have a lot of very hard implementation challenges. Dominion is currently planning to build new gas infrastructure, which would mean that they wouldn't meet the BCA timeline for shuttering fossil fuel plants as well.
And just a general comment on that point is that's one of the main challenges we're going to have in dealing with and putting this plan together and dealing with, again, what I mentioned earlier, the large increase or predicted increase in the electricity demand, and how do you factor that in and still achieve what's current statutes on the books or other emission reduction programs. There not only do you have the VCEA, but at the moment you still have federal power plant controls or standards that would also come into play that would that kind of conflict with some of the things that are going into Dominion's internal planning. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how all of that plays out.
Thank you all for your comments and questions as well. Hopefully this has been an insightful conversation for you. Please continue to insert in these questions as well. We do have a resource that was just shared with us. So the U.S. Climate Alliance just published this guide on how state level policy can foster a more climate friendly land use. I actually did read over this really briefly, and it was really interesting. Unfortunately, Virginia is not a member of the U.S. Climate Alliance right now, but they are often producing really helpful resources for all states, regardless of their membership. So thank you for sharing that. Appreciate it. Okay, wonderful. Feel free, again, as always, continue to input these questions or comments in, and we'll do our best to answer those. We're still monitoring the chat. I'm going to move on just for a second, just to share a few available resources to you all as we continue with this climate planning process. And when we talk about sort of these larger picture items, it often can feel defeating that we talk about climate action, but there are so many barriers and so many challenges to seeing success across sectors. So sometimes we like to end things with a little bit of optimism and positivity. So we'll try and do that for you today. But when we talk about maybe personal actions, maybe you're feeling climate motivated after this presentation and wanting to know what you can continue to do to contribute in your own way, shape, or form. Often when we talk about homeowners and ability to reduce greenhouse gas emissions there, always purchasing Energy Star certified appliances, if that's a economic accessibility to you, that's one way that you can reduce your emissions that way in your homes, or even something like installing a programmable thermostat can help to reduce your emissions for heating and cooling. And same with renters, that's another application that can be applied there. But even something as simple as not washing your clothes in hot water, washing with cold or warm water can reduce your emissions. If recycling is something that is available to you and accessible, doing that and as best you can, as we talked about, it's very hard to recycle and do it right, but that's another way to reduce emissions. And then if transportation, public transportation is available to you, utilizing that as best you can, and even advocating for expanded public transit in your communities is always a way to help reduce emissions in the transportation sector. Even carpooling with friends to work one day might be a fun way to engage in that activity. And then we've talked about this a little bit before. This is the DEQ Community Survey. So this is open right now until April. You can scan the QR code and continue to take the survey that way. So a lot of these questions that we asked of you today, what are your barriers? What are your opportunities? What are the challenges? These are questions that are reflected in the survey. And so if you want to provide more detailed responses to these, please feel free to do so. And you can take your time. It shouldn't take more than about 10 or so minutes. And if you have any questions on accessing it or questions on the content, please reach out to us. And then stay connected. So you can subscribe to the CPRG bulletin. This is a link to that as well. And you can just enter your email. We try not to overwhelm you with emails, but this is a way that you can continue to stay connected with us, hear about upcoming events. We have a few more in-person community listening sessions coming up on Wednesday, and then we have some next week as well. So if you want more information on that, we share those in the bulletin. That's also always on our website, which is that second link there. So this is where we have a calendar, we have our programming efforts, we have so many documents that you can read about, all of the different reports that we've created for a lot of these activities. So feel free, if you have a free afternoon and want to peruse through that, feel free to do so. And then you can always reach out to us at our email. So this is the cprg@deq.virginia.gov email. So this is monitored all throughout the week, all the time. So we are always checking this and doing our best to respond to you as soon as possible. If you have a specific question that you want us to direct or route that to, please let us know. You can always drop your email in the Q&A and we'll do our best to connect you to the right people if we are not the right folks to fully answer your questions. And then we also have a post-meeting feedback form. So this is our final survey. This is our final link, but we would love to continue to hear how we can expand and improve our engagement processes. So if you have comments or reflections on that, you want to continue to provide your input, we are trying to make many streams of input for you. So this is a final way that you can do that. Feel free to scan that QR code or enter in that URL, and we'll be able to receive that input and hopefully improve these engagements. And then I'll talk maybe moving forward a little bit as well. So we are continuing our engagement process throughout the spring and perhaps early summer time period before we work internally to draft the content of the plan. That'll go on from the whole summer up until early fall. Afterwards, after the draft plan is developed, it'll go through a review process and then also public comment period. So hopefully we'll have something similar to this again, maybe around October-ish timeframe. That's sort of flexible, but that's sort of what we're looking at right now to receive public comment and review on the plan, the draft plan, and ensure that we've accurately captured a lot of the comments and reflections that you've shared with us today. If you have any questions about that, please feel free to add them into the chat right now. Otherwise, I know we're running out a little bit early, so maybe we'll save you about 15 minutes in your afternoon here today. Please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you so much, everybody, for all of your engagements today. If you have any questions about our future engagements, please reach out, and we hope you all have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you so much.